Shalom, it's Alizah with Mirashali Village, and today I am shooting this video to share how you can co-use two texts, one that is written by an African American author or a person of African descent, and the other written by a non-Black person. Okay, so let me start by stating that when I put my history lessons together, the majority of what we read is written by a person of African descent for a few reasons. First, the content is going to be more relatable to me and my students already being African American. Second, we're going to have more truth about our people written in the content. And third, there's going to be more representation of us throughout the content that we're reading, including illustrations. All right, there's a few more reasons, but those three are the main reasons why I am looking for content written by African American authors or persons of African descent. Now, one of the things that I also do is I will choose a very low number, maybe one or two books that is written by a non-Black person covering the same topic or the same subject, okay? Now, I have a reason for doing that. Before I go too far into that, let me say this. I put together a curriculum called Our History Veil, Volume 1, and it goes through about a little bit prior to Columbus up until the 1870s or Reconstruction, as it's known. And the majority of the book list is, it's written by African Americans or has accurate depictions and history of African Americans. But there's always those one or two books that is not. And I get some flack for that on social media and on my blog from African American homeschool moms. I guess they go through my book list, see every single person that has authored the book is not African American, and that gives them something to talk about. However, I do believe that it is important to not just study what we have to say about us, and for the simple fact that it is important to know how other people view our history and ultimately us if we are left or forced, some people would say, to deal with them, as I've heard it, or just interact and connect with people. America is a melting pot. So if it was only Black people, living in a all Black land, then maybe, but I do feel like it's important for them to understand how other people view them and how they see our history so that they are informed when they go out into the world. And the best way to do that is to show them books written by non-Black people, and they can see what they think about us, how we're represented, how our history is told or not in some cases. Okay, so I know I have people that just skim that list and they're passers-by, and that's fine, to each his or her own. However, if we are only looking at things on the surface, we can miss a lot of things that are underneath. Okay, so getting to my point. This past school year, I wrote a 20th century, a little bit of 21st century, 2008. So I wrote a majority 20th century history curriculum for a high school student. And we had a conversation not too long ago. She is just a few weeks shy of 16, to give you an idea. And in our conversation, she was explaining to me that she really, really loved that I had a book written by Hakim, who is a non-Black author, and a book written by Gates, who is an African American author. she was explaining to me how she really liked that presence because it helped her to be able to compare and contrast the difference. Of course, when she got to Gates, the history was richer, it was more meatier, and she felt like it was, what else did she say? She felt like it was more truthful. And she said sometimes her mom would be reading passages to her younger siblings, and she would just be listening in, and she could easily, after so many weeks, she could easily go, oh, that must be Hakim telling that story because of the way that it's presented. Oh, that must be Gates telling that story, right? And so as I was conversing with her, both her and her mother, they were sharing that they really liked having the history be told with the non-Black perspective and the African-American perspective running side by side for the most part as I did the lessons. And so what she was able to gain from that is how to hear who's telling the story. She didn't even need to look, even though that would have been, a treat all on its own. How to properly discern what's going on. Why is one person saying this and one person saying this about the same event? Why do they disagree? What's going on here? Of course, it leads to more research and critical thought. So I do things in a way that will produce a lot of critical skills for the students, regardless of where they are in age. And then sometimes I kind of write it where the parent will grasp it in order for them to explain what is obvious to them, to their students. So I have a sample lesson from those high school plans that I wrote for her in order to show you. So again, if you are a person that's like every single thing that I have to read in history to my students has to be authored by Black people, then okay, no problem. But if you are a person who believes there is some value to being able to compare and contrast two different thoughts on the same content, this video will be helpful for you. Here we go. So in one of the lessons, we learned about Woodrow Wilson and federal segregation. And basically, let me show you the book. We are reading from this text right here, Life Upon These Shores by Henry Louis Gates Jr. And so let me go to the reading so that you can understand what I mean. Okay, so I won't read the whole passage, obviously, but basically what Gates is conveying is how segregation kind of came on the scenes, at least in this context, via Woodrow Wilson. And he basically, goes into African Americans had this hope that he was going to do so much things. He promised he was going to do so much things for the African American community just to get in office and to turn, basically. And one of the things, and I'll just read it, that I had them kind of discuss was describe Wilson's actions and discuss how you would feel if you had voted for a candidate believing he would be different, but indeed he was just the same as the presidents before, right? So I kind of heard how this conversation went with my student. But basically, they were discussing like, oh wow, it's kind of the same old. Whites are promising, Blacks that it will be better, that they will, authorize this and officiate this and usher this in order to gain our loyalty and support. Because at this point, it's necessary. We have made up so much of the population where you can no longer just ignore our presence. So they would come in, get our loyalty, get our support, what have you, just to turn. And African Americans, traditionally being a very loyal and supportive people, kind of fall for it every time, if you will. That was kind of the tone of that. And so a little bit later, about a week later, I had them read a little bit of what Hakim had to say about Woodrow Wilson. And so I am going to read a few lines of what she said. Woodrow Wilson's greatest strength was his integrity. People trusted him because they knew he was trustworthy. He inspired others. He believed in the American dream. In Jefferson's words about how all people have a right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Wilson wanted to see that dream spread around the world. He convinced the people of the United States to go to war without thought of gain for themselves. He made it clear to everyone that America's one goal was to make the world safe for democracy. He made America's participation in the war seem noble and unselfish. Okay, so that is not the story that we read in Gates' description of these events. So here's some things that I had them think about as food for thought. Compare Hakim's view of Wilson to Gates' view in the reading. Do they agree with each other? What are some potential reasons for the difference in opinions? And so obviously she discusses with her mother, and again, I was made privy to the conversation. And so obviously one of the reasons is one author is African American and the other one isn't, right? So we talk about why that is so and why those differences would be present just off that fact alone. When studying any subject, but especially history, one must consider the source. Though Wilson wanted to make the world safe for democracy, he did not extend that to African Americans. Can America or the world have democracy when one group of people are consistently denied and unrepresented? Decide if you think Wilson's words were consistent with his actions. Then explain your position. So that is a little bit. This happened several times, throughout the course, and even myself. I teach a few high school students. I have 5th and 6th graders, and so they're able to understand this as well. Maybe not on a level as high as high schoolers, but nonetheless they can. And we talk about that like, man, why would this particular person say this and this particular person say that? What's going on here? Who's telling the truth? Who's not? Does anybody have anything to gain by not telling the truth? Does anybody have anything to lose by telling the truth? All of those things we talk about. And so you teach them how to be critical of what they're reading. You teach them how to discern content and authorship. You teach them who to trust and who not to trust in terms of who's writing history. But you do that by adding in some books that are not written by people who look like you, so that you can understand how they view you and your history, and then you can compare and contrast and have those discussions with your students and children. So hopefully that was helpful. I know I have a lot of people ask me, why did I choose a book not authored by a Black person? I have certain moms who ask me, how do you use books written by both? How do you address that? And I've also had people ask, well, why are most of them written by Black people? So I hope I answered all of those questions. I hope I've also given response to persons who have issues with it not being an all Black authored textbook list or history book list, if you will. And I hope I was able to teach a mom or a homeschool mom how to co-use two texts like that in a critical and constructive way as you are teaching your children about history, or really any topic, but specifically history. If this video was helpful to you, please like, share, subscribe. Until next time, shalom.